What would you think if I said to you that this complex layered paint job that you can see here on this rather large and scary FDM print might actually be the easiest way that you can practice your airbrush skills, or even pick one up for the very first time? Well, I'll hope you'll say, after watching this video, that yeah, you were right, Mr. Crackfox, that was pretty easy and I had a lot of fun doing it. Well, stranger things have happened. First, I'll take you through my steps to get this amazing FDM print off the printer, and then I'll take you through the finishing steps to make it look like it came off a resin printer. And then I'll take you through how this intricate, complicated looking paint job is actually very forgiving and how much fun it can be, and how you can use and practice a lot of airbrush techniques without any chance of actually going wrong. Anyway, stick with me and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Anyway, I've waffled on too much, so let's dial it up to 11 and let's crack on to the main part of the video. So here's the STL I bought. It's from CAMM. I got it from Cults 3D and it was definitely the best version of Vecna I could find online. I had printed this a few years ago at about 15 centimeters high, but I wanted this to be a lot bigger. It's going to be about 32 centimeters high. And you may notice that I sliced off the base. That's because I think it can be freestanding, and that means I can print it even bigger. But as you've just seen, I did have to slice the bottom of it off just to make sure that it's going to print on a nice flat surface and stay upright. And then I just check it against a cube that's sized to the print volume of the Bamboo A1 that I use. And if you're interested in the sort of things and modifications that I'm making to this, I've done a whole video on it on a T800 Arnold Schwarzenegger bust that goes into a lot more detail on the sorts of mucking about that I tend to do in Blender to make a print really, really big. And as you can see, I decided to slice it just below the bottom of the chest to make sure none of the detail from the front was going to get cut off. And so here it is on the build plate. You can see it's like a nice, comfortable fit. Could go slightly bigger, but I'm always mindful to leave enough room, for a brim and for the supports to fit around the edge if they need to be around the edge. And for the settings, I don't really change anything from the basics. I make sure it's all calibrated within the A1 using the proper calibration stuff that it comes with. So this is just the 0.12 millimeter fine preset. I've just added supports. I always do tree slim. I usually put build plate only, but I figured that it might struggle to get underneath the chin, so I've had to turn that off. And the biggest tip that I found was just doubling the Z axis that you just saw of the supports so that they're about double the layer height. This makes the supports really, really easy to remove. And it's using the exact settings that I used for the T800 model that didn't actually need any sanding when, strictly speaking, when that printed. So I know the quality is going to be really good. So as you can see here, it's looking absolutely fantastic. It is an amazing sculpt and very faithful and accurate to Vecna in real life. Well, not in real life, because if it was real life, that would be scary as balls if this thing existed. So there was some very, very slight layer lines on the chest. You virtually can't see them, but you could see some on the head. But there's also a bit of a texture around where my hand is there on the forehead and the side of the head. It's not on the STL, and it doesn't look like layer lines, so I don't know if it's because I blew the STL up by 100% and it did something weird. If you know what that is, please let me know in the comments, because it'd be good to know for future reference. So I was going to give it a bit of a sanding. I ended up just using the 320 for it and not having to go down to anything finer. So on to the next step of making it look really smooth and like it's come from a resin printer. It's a well-known thing to cover it in UV resin. If you've got a resin printer, just using some spare resin, or just get yourself a bottle if you haven't. It's very cheap, but it's really worth having on hand if you've never tried it before, because it's a bit gloopy. It's just got about enough gloopiness for its surface tension to fill in the scratch marks from the sanding and the slight layer lines that's left. I'd say 80 to 90% of this model doesn't need any finishing at all. It's just those bits, and I thought if I'm doing the head and the chest, filling in those little marks and layer lines, very, very slight layer lines, that I might as well do the whole thing, especially considering the organic sliminess of this character anyway. It's only going to help the overall finish to it when it comes to painting. So as you can see, if you've not done this before, you've probably seen people using it online. You just paint a generous amount around the areas you want, obviously being careful not to pull it up too much or obscure any detail. It looks like it's not very thick layer at all, but then when you use a UV torch like I just did to really quickly to cure it, you'll feel that it's already really, really smooth, and just this very, very thin layer that you've got on there is enough. So you really don't need to go crazy with it at all. But what I would say is wear gloves. I didn't have any gloves because I dislike wearing them. but I've virtually got nothing on my hands anyway. But I did have an open window. You can get a little bit of residue on your hands when you're touching and testing it. So you kind of touch it as minimal as you can. It will still feel tacky, even though it's been cured by I have to say, very underpowered light that I've got. I shouldn't really admit this, and I didn't film it because it's not very good or intended usage of the piece of kit. But what I did was got the Anycubic wash and cure station out of the cupboard, took the lid off, turned it round, propped it up on some books so that the magnetic sticker was backing up onto the sensor, tricking the station to think that the lid was on, meaning that I could get the full power of those lights with a big model like this wouldn't fit into the station with the lid on usually. But I didn't look at the lights, but it just meant that I could rotate this for a couple of minutes just in front of the lights to make sure it was really well cured. I started doing that on the massive alien head that I've made a video of, just because it was so big I didn't know and couldn't tell if everything had been cured by just a tiny hand torch, so had to improvise. And as if that didn't make me look like enough of an idiot already, I remember on the alien head, I kept curing and curing and curing because it was always tacky, and I was convinced it wasn't curing enough or properly, even though I'd done it for ages. But this just shows how dense I can be at times, is that, of course, I hadn't washed the resin off, had I? Which you would normally do if it was a resin print. You would use the wash function of the wash and cure station. So hence here I am making sure it gets a bloody good wash with IPA that I've just got in a spray bottle. Sometimes using a rag and a bit of tissue paper or a toothbrush to really get in all the nooks and crannies, because I really can't stress this enough. You have to make sure that you get all the residue off. Otherwise your paint just won't dry on top of it. But it's very easy to fix and to spot. When you're undercoating, just give a light dusting first. Have a look for any bits that aren't drying. But dead simply, get a Q-tip or a rag, little bit of IPA, rub off the undried paint and the residue. And I'd clean slightly larger than the patch just to make sure, just to be safe. If it was due to resin not being cured, then just reapply a little bit, cure it, and clean that area. It sounds arduous and messy, but I can tell you it was less than 30 minutes, and it's limited exposure to resin. And it just makes FDM printing look like resin printing if you apply resin over the top. Sounds a bit stupid that you're sort of using resin to make FDM look good, but using that little of it, it means that you just don't have to rely on the mess of using the printer. And because I have ridiculous ADHD and even on medication, I do waffle on, even though I said at the beginning that I wouldn't. Just for full transparency, I don't script any of these bits, so I do get carried away. I do a lot of retakes and a lot of editing, because if I didn't, this video would be about a day fucking long. So I do apologise and thank you for bearing with me, but I think it's really important for me to be authentically myself, so hopefully you guys can relate to me more and I'm not playing some kind of character or a sanitized version of myself. I obviously script the intro to camera part, which I've not actually been able to dedicate as much time to because the printing and painting takes so long. So it might be off-putting to some, but it's a risk I'm going to have to take in order to be myself. But that's the whole point of this channel. It's designed to be warts and all. From the video production and commentary to the dubious modeling and painting techniques. Speaking of painting techniques, let's get caught up, because this is the really important part and what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. As you can see on this, and I know you're not going to believe me that this isn't a photograph of Vecna, this is just a little drawing I made. The most important part of this video and this painting technique is the layering. I say technique, it was really just making up as I went along. But the important point is, especially if you're new to painting or want to get to a more realistic level, is remember it's a staged approach and a layered approach. Even the cleanest of model painters and model painting techniques will often use a staged and layered approach, even though it looks like it's one flat colour. But to back up the big claim and statement I made at the beginning of the video, doing this chaotic, noisy, forgiving painting technique really started to make me feel comfortable finally with using an airbrush. As I'm using anything from sort of medium-sized scribbly lines to really, really thin veins. I know that it looks quite rough on here, but it's just for demonstration purposes. And then pulling right back and kind of giving a dusting to make things look a bit transparent, to playing about flicking the trigger for spattering effect, to moving the airbrush further or closer to the model to change the line width for variation. And on such a big model as well, this is the important thing. Any mistakes kind of get lost in the noise. Any oversprays can be hidden. And if things aren't really working out, then you can go back a step or two. You've got such a large canvas on a model this size that it's really easy to undo mistakes and try different techniques and experiment and have fun. And here's a really key point as well. You're doing it on a live model, so it's much more engaging for me anyway than doing repetitive training techniques on a white piece of paper, for instance. And that's precisely why I chose Vecna to do this technique on for practice, because the skin textures and effect that we're going for practically demands this kind of haphazard, chaotic, crazy painting technique that's going to be completely individual to each person as well, because you just really can't copy it like for like, else it'll just drive you insane. And I started getting a really great feel for the airbrush and the way the paints were flowing, and my aim started getting better. So towards the end, I could hit exactly where I wanted to hit straight away. Just building that muscle memory. I think that's the thing, the muscle memory and the sort of technique memory. So that's the crux of it. That's the main claim I was saying at the beginning. And it's really therapeutic and fun to do. So I'd recommend it to anybody. So with all that said, if you're up for giving it a go, make sure to drop a like and pop a comment in there to let us know how you got on. So with all that sort of idea behind it, all said and done, let's see it in action. Over a base coat of this maroon coloured chaotic red from the Army Painter Mega Set, which flows amazingly, and there's affiliate links in the description. And I was using about 15 to 20 psi to do the scribbling technique with Broodmother Purple from the same set over the top. And as you can see from the close-ups, I was playing about with contouring, having a go with the veins, having a bit of a play, putting in some shadows in the recesses, and basically just breaking up the flat red colour, make it feel bruised and sort of damaged and ill and demonic. And going back to that idea of it being a layered paint job, you don't have to do it all at one hit. So I didn't want to go too crazy with it at this stage. I want to get a bit of a feel for it, and I did some spattering as well, which is another very fun thing to do, and painted it under the eyes and in the recesses. Then I decided the next step, it would be fun to bring in some of the pale cups like skin tones, and I chose to use Skeletal Bone from the Air Mega Set. Some of you might prefer doing the darker tones and getting steadily lighter, but I decided to jump to the maximum contrast to really break apart the underlying skin tone, so that this first pass has like as much contrast and changes in tone and colour as possible. And this could really help you get a feel for the overall skin texture, a bit of a preview of the effect that we're going for quite early on. And as you can see here, I wasn't being too precise or too heavy-handed, apart from that point where it came out far too quick. But it, again, shows it's a perfect demonstration of how you can fix your mistakes on this particular model and this particular painting technique. But as you can see from the chest area, there's not a consistent level of paint that's been put down, and it doesn't obliterate what's underneath. It was still about, it was around 20 to 15 psi, so you can be nice and gentle with it without like obliterating the underlying layers. And as I was filming the close-up, I saw that there was quite large areas of red left, so I did go in and break up a bit more. I also did a touch of spattering just to give that extra texture, but you can see how the underlying purples and reds are still showing through, and it looks like it's sort of under a layer of thin skin to a degree, due to keeping the spray of the paint quite light. But on areas where you do want to break up the shape, so you can see on the right hand side that tendril, for instance, you can see that zigzag effect, which I'm continuing to do here with another skin tone, which I think was a slightly this was just a standard peach color actually I mixed up. So, but you could use any sort of warmer skin tone here, again just spotting it around the place and putting it in random locations and random shapes to just add to the chaos really. And there's definitely no real design to where I'm putting the paint, just a general guide from the reference photos. And you'll see at this sort of stage we are going to be starting to lose some of the darker colours. But this is the great thing of painting like this for this particular model, is that we can come back and repeat the process over the top of everything we've built up already. And yes, some of the earlier layers will get more and more hidden, but they'll still be there in places that just adds to the richness overall. And with this lighter skin tone, it's a little bit heavier in places, especially around the sort of the raised areas of the cheeks and the large veins in his head that are actually modelled in. You don't have to paint those. Because the plan is at this stage, I was thinking that I was going to cover off the main areas of the flesh and only sort of come back to it for sort of detailing and a bit of weathering and such. As you can see here, it's starting to look quite reminiscent to the, if you go back to the reference photos. Yes, it's a bit lighter, but we're going to come over it with a bit of orange, more purple, more reds, but we're getting that sort of effect really shining through now. especially on the chest there. You can see how it's really starting to build up nicely on top of the skin tones and the reds and the purples. Hi, just a quick jump in to say if you're enjoying the video so far and you're getting anything out of it whatsoever, then please consider putting a comment and maybe a like and even subscribing. Any support would really go a long way. Really appreciate it. Thanks. So because I was really happy with this as a sort of starting point, I created a save point by putting Clearcoat over the top, which makes it really easy to remove any mistakes in any paint on the next pass, which this time around is Incursion Orange. Just pulling out those veins in the top of the head and some orange splotches dotted about here and there on the reference shots, sort of around his right sort of shoulder where the tendrils are meeting his chest, and plus, you know, splodging it around the place as well to keep building up the level of detail and level of chaos. And to do this, I was just sort of splodging about, pulling the trigger quickly in little areas, not to spatter, but to just sort of give splodges of the orange. And then I go back to the red colours using this N Carmine red to fill out the sort of the redder areas around his face and the head. Put in some veins as well, some splatters, bits of textures, bit of scribbling, all sorts really. You can see sort of building up in the areas around the head to add that interest there. An interesting thing to point out actually that didn't occur to me a second ago is that when you put a clear coat over the top, it sort of darkens all the colours and sort of sets them, or not, almost like sort of unifies them a little bit, which is actually quite good for this. It enriches them, especially in the shadows. So it does look a bit darker at the moment than it did before the clear coat. And here you can see just there, I've just made a bit of an overspray, just dab it with my thumb and off it goes. Not going to see it. I'm just doing that splodging thing again. Hopefully you can see a little bit easier with the red is just had like almost spots of each individual colour as opposed to doing sort of zigzag continuous lines. On the reference shots, you'll see that he has got sort of more spotted texture towards the back of his head. And although these spots look a bit sort of primary and bright, you could go in with a paintbrush or an airbrush and just give it a little bit of like shadowing. But because we're going to sort of go over the top with it with sort of purples and then a final sort of skin tone pass, that it's all going to sort of unify anyway. And then I swap back to the Broodmother purple and start getting in these main veins. Again, really low PSI, I think about 15, only pulling back very slightly on the brush. You're getting a really good feel for how the paint flows. You have to keep making sure you're not getting tip dry. Spray it off to the side a couple of times, every now and again to just clear the nozzle and you're getting a nice flow out of it. If you've got one of those airbrushes like I have, where you've got a screw on the back that limits how far you can pull back the trigger, I'd actually say don't use it. You're never going to, you're not going to build up your own muscle memory if you sort of use that as an aid, so to speak. But it is tempting and fair to use especially on the veins there, to make sure you don't overspill anything. They can be really haphazard because, like I say, they're quite clear now and they're clearly just sort of scribbled on. When we put the bit of a flesh layer over the top, they're going to look a lot calmer than that. And here's some detail on the head, obviously, with a few more veins, added in the red into the recesses of the scars on his cheeks. You can see the sort of how the red splodges sort of disappeared into the background when we were painting them a few minutes ago. They were really clear and a little bit overpowering. Well, I'll say overpowering, not too bad actually. And then I'm coming back to skeleton tone, which is the really light flesh tone, to give a dusting. You can see it's sort of just fading those veins there to make it feel like they're under a layer of skin on top of them. So it's just a case of sort of rinsing and repeating, going back and forth between the lighter shades and the detailing and the darker shades and what have you. But I think you can really see now that we're really getting into a territory where it's resembling Vecna really well, and we're not too far off finishing now. So I'm just going around and giving any of the sort of too in-your-face areas of detail a little bit of a dusting, calm everything down a little bit where needed. I'm never doing it in a sort of consistent blanket of colour, even where I'm trying to sort of cover up areas like the veins here. I'm making sure to sort of vary the amount of paint I'm putting down in a particular area to make the skin sort of effect seem thicker and thinner in areas. And if you're sort of happy at this sort of stage, then I would recommend doing another coating of Clearcoat to give you that save point once again. I didn't, because I was under a little bit of pressure for time, and just decided to use this amazing green stuff, realistic coagulated blood paint, which is just fantastic, which I used on the T800 Arnold Schwarzenegger video. If you want to go and check that out, there's a lot of fun had there. But yeah, it would have been better to have a fresh coat of Clearcoat, but because I knew I hadn't really painted too much around this area in the last pass, I knew it was pretty much clean Clearcoat anyway. So I'd dabble this on really sort of liberally, knowing that I'm going to come back to it and wipe off the majority, which will just sort of be hitting the high points to sort of bring the texture through, the skin texture through on the higher points, and letting that blood soak in. You could hand paint the blood into it, but the messiness of this sort of technique adds to the effect, I think, rather than trying to be too precise. But again, don't worry at this stage it looks far too much, because you've just got to trust in the process. And I know that I'm going to come back to it and calm it all down and bring a little bit of the skin textures and the skin colours back, and darken it up with a bit, break it up with a bit of the purples again. So don't worry too much. Don't judge every stage by the way it looks. Judge it for its purpose and what's going to come next. Sort of planning for the future, so to speak. I actually come back with the purples and paint purples into the sort of recesses of the scars and around the edges of of where the red blended into the head and the chin. I just realised though that I mustn't have recorded it because I can't find that footage, but you'll see it a little bit more detail when we go to the next phase, when I'm painting the eyes. Because he's more red around his temples and across the start of his forehead, in the reference shots and in my actual paint work that you'll see in a second. Sorry about that, but yeah, it was just a case of going over into the dark recesses with the purple, and putting a bit more red. You can see sort of the discoloration across the top of his head there, and as you can see here, I've tried to replicate that a little bit as well. The eyes, oh my god, this has probably got to be the 5th or 6th or 7th time of repainting the eyes, because having shaky hands and trying to do it around the camera is really difficult. But wanting to get this sort of, in the reference shots, it's got like a bluer ring and then a light blue center, and overall sort of ghosted feel. So I've got gloss varnish with a little bit of it says white speed paint, but it's really grey, and just splodge that over, kind of give it a bit of a ghosted look. Probably make it look a bit lighter actually. But here's the finished thing. That is everything done. Obviously covered it in gloss. Looks great photographed on black and moving the light around. But you can see all those layers really paying off, and all the richness that we've added over time is just all built up and has become more than the sum of its parts. I definitely think if I had more time, because I'm trying to do this in my spare time and time to make videos for you guys, is that I'd be perhaps a bit more faithful to the photos perhaps, and I could go back into sort of areas of splodges and give it sort of a dark top and a lighter bottom to make it feel like it's got a bit more depth, those sort of areas of splodge and stuff. But yeah, that's the finished thing. I hope you enjoyed this chaotic walkthrough.